Welcome to Minnesota Zen Center, and hello. My name is Deborah Mielke, and I've been in practice here for a little over 10 years, but I started Zen meditation back in 1974 with Tim Burkett at a free university class, so I might be one of his longest term students, but I kind of made a different path until I'm coming back here more recently. I use the pronouns she and they. They is more of an internal gender identity, and she is more my external expression. This morning I would like to talk about the game of chutes and ladders in Zen practice, otherwise known as the game of karma. And good deeds in this game allow one to move up a ladder, and bad deeds are associated with falling down a chute. How many of you have played chutes and ladders as a kid? Okay, there's some familiarity with this game, thank you. So first I want to talk about a little bit about gaming, because the concept of gaming is pretty common in our day-to-day lives, and workplaces use gaming to improve productivity. I use my Fitbit and my pedometer kind of gaming to help me get more steps in a day. Please come on in. Thank you. And there are apps that can even keep track of how many days of meditation you do in a row, so you can try to achieve more days. That's kind of gaming. And I never really had a game on my iPhone, because I couldn't play them until I found Classic Words, which is a Scrabble game against the iPhone computer. And now I find myself playing it a little bit too much, so more than I think that's helpful. But I can kind of get an idea of how attractive this is to keep playing games that are very interesting and exciting. I also have this relationship with putting a puzzle together. So once I start a puzzle, I find a hard time of leaving it alone until it's done. Like Benton, my husband, was a greeter out there. When it's time to go to bed, we'll have to turn off the lights. So games can be like that for us. But back to chutes and ladders. It's based on an older game called Snakes and Ladders from the 2nd century in India. And even Buddhists had a version of this game, I think in the 900s. And it's a game of morality and karma with liberation by doing good deeds. And you kind of get setbacks. There used to be a lot more snakes than ladders in the older version. I think that's kind of the mindset. We're a little bit more optimistic these days. But it came to England then and got converted into a children's game. The current version, and I'm sorry, I meant to bring the game itself, but it has pictures instead of words. So there's no words in it. And then you spin a dial and the pieces move forward. If you hit on a good deed, you go up the ladder. If you hit on something bad, you go down the chute. And the top score is 100. So you reach 100, you won the game, okay? I read where it takes an average of 40 moves to reach 100. So they actually have a curve of the probability of reaching 100. But here are some examples of good and bad karma from the game. And like I said, all of these are in picture forms. So there's a picture of a child helping someone cross the street and making a friend with that person, planting seeds and picking flowers later, mowing the lawn and being able to go to the circus as a result. And the chutes Some of the examples are carrying too many dishes and then crying because you fell and broke them all, right? Writing on a wall and having to wash it off later. And then a picture of someone eating a lot of candy, like holding their stomach with a stomach ache later. So kind of natural consequences rather than, artificial punishments or anything. And these are, this game actually was shown in a study to be a good way to encourage preschoolers, especially in poverty, to learn numbers and counting. So I think it is a really valuable game for kids. But I'm going to give you a quote here from Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Has anyone read that book? It is a pretty amazing book and covers the history of India and some twins that were exchanged at birth with nobody's knowledge. So this is what the narrator has to say about Chutes and Ladders. All games have morals, and the game of snakes and ladders captures, as no other activity can hope to do, the eternal truth that for every ladder you hope to climb, there is a snake waiting around the corner. And for every snake, a ladder will compensate. But it's more than that, no mere carrot and stick affair, because implicit in the game is unchanging two-ness of things. The duality of up against down, good against evil, the solid rationality of ladders balances the occult sinuosities of the serpent. In the opposition of staircase and cobra, we can see metaphorically all conceivable oppositions. Alpha against omega, father against mother. So, in Zen, we try to do away with dualities. But this game and karma really has a fair amount of dualities involved in it. And this narrator continues. He says, but I found very early in my lifetime that the game lacked one crucial dimension, that of ambiguity, because it's also possible to slither down a ladder and to climb in triumph on the venom of a snake. So I'm going to address certainty, uncertainty, the chutes, the ladders, and then kind of how our Zen practice brings those together. So I'm going to start out with falling down chutes. And the example I'm going to use is the rabbit hole, because that's been mentioned a few times here. I said, now, what is this rabbit hole? Because I feel like sometimes people avoid them, but I think sometimes people ought to jump into the rabbit hole and see what happens. So I looked it up online. It says, to go down the rabbit hole, to enter into a situation or begin a process or journey that is particularly strange, problematic, difficult, complex, or chaotic, especially one that becomes increasingly so as it develops or unfolds. And this is an allusion to Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And then another statement said, the expression I want to tell you about today is down a rabbit hole. This is one you can picture. We use this expression when you're entering into an unknown, disorienting, confusing place that's hard to get out of. Usually we use this metaphorically. You are not actually in a physical space, but a mental place. A mental place that's confusing, disorienting, and hard to escape. And we usually use this term when someone goes off in a pointless direction that can do that person harm. So with this game and results of our harmful thoughts, speech, actions, or bad karma, maybe like going down a rabbit hole. And I'm not suggesting that we do bad karma intentionally, But jumping into rabbit holes may not be all bad if you're aware of how they're affecting you. They may also not be avoidable at all times. So sometimes you just are in one. In fact, sometimes it may seem our whole life is a rabbit hole. But we have chutes too. So we'll get to those later. And it may help to open up your awareness to your feelings, thoughts, and the situation without judgment or shame. And I find when I've been in these rabbit holes or have fallen down my chutes, it helps to figure out what's going on inside myself rather than focusing on the circumstances outside of myself. So making up my stories, my righteous anger, creating dialogues with my opponent are all my own mental fabrications that sometimes can make it worse. So I'll give you an example. So someone in my neighborhood, Benton knows this, walks their dog without a leash, and that dog is reactive and threatening to my dog. So this makes me rather upset, and I have had some inappropriate, angry words with this person. But what I find is that I'm still in arguments with them in my mind, even when I'm walking. And he and the dog are nowhere around. So it's like, okay, Deb, you're getting down this rabbit hole now. And I kind of backed up, took a step back, and not literally, but realized I was entertaining myself with all these excellent reasons why I should be angry at this person. And so I think that's an example of just how you can be in there and kind of perpetuate it when it's really maybe not necessary. Chutes can also be personal losses, grief and tragedy that happens to all of us and are out of our control. It's kind of like rolling that dice and getting down the chute. So an example, we had an employee at our clinic. I'm a family physician, or was, I'm retired. And one Monday, he didn't show up because he had been in a head-on collision with a driver who crossed the center line. This is not something he could have predicted or avoided with good behaviors. And was this bad karma on the part of the other driver? Or even some people blame victims for what happens to them, saying it's their own bad karma. And I just don't think that this is true. I think this is one of those rolls of the dice. And taking karma too far can lead to blaming people or oneself unnecessarily, causing more suffering. And with Buddhism, we're really trying to relieve suffering. We're not into this shame and blame. And Buddha also said that our events that are outside and not a part of our karma, we can't control earthquakes, hurricanes, getting cancer. And thinking that someone causes these things to happen or deserves them seems to be unnecessarily cruel. But how we respond to these tragic situations may be more under our control. We have thought patterns that can make our pain worse, increase suffering, and thought patterns that can help us through. So I think in a recent talk Tim gave, he talked about how the brain tends to focus on negative things, and that by reminding ourselves with gratitude the positive things in our life, and even doing that formally, like writing down, 3 things at the end of the day that you're grateful for, that were good during the day, can counteract those negative thoughts with that. I also heard a study that suggests 40% of our happiness is inborn. We're just genetically happy people. 40% is controllable by our minds, and 20% may be situational. So I think that varies by population too, and by individual. So some people are more susceptible to negative things in their life, or have had so many negative things that it's hard to dig out from that. Another example, I had a patient who had to have a leg amputation from a motorcycle accident. And we talked about this study that showed that after a year, someone who's won the lottery versus someone who's become paraplegic returns to their baseline happiness, which is pretty profound. I mean, but when I talked with him about this, he reminded me, he said, yes, but I would rather have been the person winning the lottery. Okay, so we're gonna go on to climbing up ladders. So when I'm climbing up a ladder or steep incline, I often feel dizzier looking up than looking down. And one of the scariest climbs for me was climbing up a fire tower. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it was very windy, and the fire tower was swaying. The further up you got, the more it was swaying. I was doing all right until I looked up to see how much further I had to go. I was like, oh, no. I have to get out of here. So I climbed back down. So I tend to get more upset when, in day-to-day life, I feel worse when I'm thinking how much I want to achieve or accomplish than in just taking things step by step. When things become too daunting or scary, it's better for me to focus on the closest step and be willing to succeed or fail regardless. And sometimes life just throws us hard situations, no matter how well we are doing, working on our goals with right speech, right intention, right action. So I view these things as more valuable in and of themselves, that this is our foundation that helps us stabilize along the way. We also run into chutes and ladders with our Zen practice. So one of my least favorite koans is the one about a Zen monk who's hanging from the top of a pole by his teeth when a beginner or a student asks him a question. Now, if he opens his mouth to speak, like he ought to, I mean, he's got all this beautiful knowledge, he'll fall and die. If he doesn't, he's really not helping the student. So I didn't really understand this. I didn't like it until Wanda Isle, she used to teach her, explained that, how did he get up there? I mean, he himself got him up to that precarious place. And I think sometimes we can do that with our Zen practice, is get ourselves to a place where, okay, we just gotta let go, fall back to the ground. And Tim Burkett in his book, and I brought the books with, Zen and the Age of Anxiety, talks a good deal about, or he has a chapter about falling. And he says, when you fall all the way to the ground. And another saying, I think it's from Norm Fisher. Ted, you might correct me if you know, but when you fall, use the ground to push yourself back up. I mean, it's the grounding that I think is our Zen practice. So I thought that was good. So now I'm going to give a second koan that Ted discussed in an entire talk on this koan. So I apologize for just taking a little snippet, but it's case 26 of the gateless barrier. Two monks roll up the blind. So the case. The great Fa Yin of Qingling took the high seat, like I'm doing, just chair, but anyway, took the high seat before midday meal to preach to his assembly. Raising his hand, he pointed to the bamboo blinds. Two monks went and rolled them up in the same manner. Fa Yin says, one gains, one loses. Now, rolling up the blinds is a metaphor for enlightenment or awakening. So why did one lose and one gain? But Wu Men's comment on this is tell me which one gained, which one lost. If you have the single eye regarding this, you will see where the national teacher, Cheng Leng, failed. But I warn you strictly against arguing gain and loss. So this ambiguity between gain and loss is there. And my feeling with that koan is that sometimes we have things that we need to lose, and sometimes we have things we need to gain. So when we gain awareness of ourselves, those become clearer. So it's not actually someone losing, although maybe someone losing is not any different than someone winning. But that's my impression of that. So what is the difference between winning and losing? Some of us may have things to lose and some of us things to gain. The game of chutes and ladders makes going up ladders part of winning. And I'm not sure this is always the case. Planting seeds of good karma may lead us to greater happiness, not necessarily greater success. But this also seems a little bit selfish. And I think these acts of kindness and generosity help everyone. And that's its own reward. And I like to prefer to see nobody left behind. So when we have goals of, improving our karma, I think it's for all of us. And we in the morning chants and during retreats often dedicate the merit of our actions, our sitting, to all others. And I really like this aspect of our ritual, is remembering that what we do is important for all of us. And I'm not sure, I was hoping Busho was going to be on here because he might correct me, but he's gone, so I can be free with this. I call this Busho's nun. So he talked about a nun one time, and this is not an exact quote, but it's as I remember it. I do this for the love of God, not for the rewards of heaven or to avoid the punishments of hell. And that saying just kind of brings, it just comes back to me fairly frequently, is that I'm not after the rewards or avoiding punishment, that seems to be an action that helps all of us. So we learn about ourselves and others through playing games, and our desire to win and avoid losing is similar to something called the 8 worldly dharmas, or the 8 worldly winds. Is anybody familiar with that? Just raise your hand if you're familiar with that. So some people are not. Okay. And I read about these first in Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart. And they're from the Pali Canon too. So there's many excellent papers written about these. So these are the 8 worldly dharmas or conditions: pleasure, pain, praise, blame, fame, or I call it respect too, because I don't think we're all after fame. So fame or respect, disgrace, gain, and loss. So the ladders are pleasure, praise, fame, and gain. The chutes are pain, blame, or shame, disgrace, and loss. And as we get caught up in this, it's like the game of chutes and ladders, finding yourselves enmeshed in winning or losing. But if we take a step back from this entrapment, realizing that the 8 worldly conditions are impermanent, bound up with suffering, and subject to change. So Pema Chodron recommends practicing seeing these wins and losses as illusions. When we're elated with good pleasure, praise, fame, and gain, we see these as not real, but constructed ideas about ourselves and the world around us. Then when we experience pain, blame, disgrace, and losses, we don't let these trap ourselves either. and cause suffering. So this is a practice that can help you find equanimity in the face of both wins and losses. So what do we do now? We're going to talk about Zen practice, but we're going to take a 2-minute break and just sit. What I want you to do is focus your attention on anything you want. It can be breathing, it can be looking outside, it can be the floor, it can be one of your neighbors. And you'll know when we're done, I'll just start talking again. So this is a poem that I have taken from a Chinese poet named Kadu from Daughters of Emptiness, page 129, but I've changed a few words to make it fit myself. Drop off the body and mind, the river of the world will never end. Upright and serene, nothing to show but the inner host. When morning comes, get out of bed, turn on the lights. Everything is in the ordinary affairs of the everyday world. So for me, stepping away from this game of chutes and ladders is easier when I have a regular meditation or sitting practice. My teachers are Zen rituals, connecting with other students, and reconnecting with that sense of quiet stillness has been helpful. Also, I find attending retreats, taking classes, work practice at Zen Center and at home, because we have work practice at home too, don't we? He laughs because he says, well, you can clean the toilets and the bathrooms at the Zen Center, but you can't clean them here. So work practice is important. But I also take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and repeat my bodhisattva vows that we'll do at the end today. And just practicing opening up to what we call big mind. And for me, that's like, well, for instance, yesterday I was at Target on a Saturday afternoon. What does that tell you? I mean, there were so many people coming and cutting in and, squeeze. It's like, okay, I just kind of stepped back, opened my awareness, and kind of found that stillness. And it was amazing how you could just watch people coming and going and just find peace within that, like, very chaotic activity. It was kind of a nice sensation. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here. And I think with Zen practice, with all this practice, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have been highly annoyed and irritated by all the people, the noise, because I'm kind of sensitive to a lot of stimuli. And then you can kind of see the child that's a little crabby, the kids playing, the person who's just trying to get out of there. You're kind of aware of all that going on. So also another time that happened, so being an intern is probably the hardest year of a physician's life, because you're done with medical school, but you're expected to be the house doctor now and answer all these things that you really don't have the experience to. And so there was one night I was covering, I think, internal medicine, and in the hallway, there's a gentleman, and he said, "Where can I get a cup of coffee?" So I stopped everything. Everything stopped. My whole world stopped. And all I focused on was bringing this gentleman who was waiting with his wife in the ICU to go get a cup of coffee. I think I might have gotten one too. And that's the thing I remember the most about my entire internship year, was that in the middle of the night, the gentleman wanting a cup of coffee and just going, stopping and getting it. That was like something profound for me. So this stepping back and dealing with our life can even mean getting enough sleep, taking walks, as long as I don't run into that mean dog, and healthy eating helps too, or just paying attention to our eating of meals, drinking the tea, washing the dishes. It's in the everyday life of taking care of our bodies, our friends and family, our homes, our work, and our world, and even our strangers that we run into. I also find that following the precepts, and can anyone, I'm going to get a little group participation, name any of the 10 precepts.
Not to kill, but to nurture life.
Okay.
Vow not to intoxicate.
There you go.
I vow not to be selfish, but be generous.
Vow not to speak ill will of others.
Not to take what's not given.
Not to take what's not given.
Not to misuse sexuality.
Not to misuse sexuality.
Not to demean myself or others, but to manifest my awakened nature.
Are you hearing that online okay? Okay, a little bit. So, and they're also found in the Eightfold Path. And we have the Four Noble Truths of there is suffering, there's cause of suffering, there's cessation of suffering, and the way is the Eightfold Path. So, anybody want to give a stab at some of the Eightfold Path here? This is fun. I wasn't planning this.
Wise view.
Wise view. Okay. Anything?
Effort.
Right effort.
Right speech.
Right speech. Anybody online? I'm going to give you an opportunity.
Right concentration.
Right concentration. That's good. That's pretty good. Thank you. So these kind of ground me and bring me into my practice that can counteract some of that ups and downs that I experience. It also is, so I just want to mention the chain of causation, because I think that's tied in with this also. And it would require another talk, but the chain of causation is getting into a loop, and it can be any direction or any steps, but it's ignorance, action, consciousness, name and form, sense organs, contact sensation, desire or greed, attachment, existence, birth, old age, death, and suffering. So I'm going to just read something from Ben Connolly's Three Natures. We just finished a class in this, and I want to read what he has to say about the chain of causation and getting off of the chain of causation. (149). So early Buddhist literature teaches that all things arise dependent on conditions in a 12-fold cyclic chain: ignorance, consciousness, karma formation, name and form, six senses, contact, sensation, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, old age and death, and back to ignorance. And each one leads to the other, and around we go. So Chutes and Ladders, there's kind of like a direction to it, but chain of causation is visualizing this more as a circular event. Ignorance, emotions, what is perceived, birth and death, and coming into being and passing away all depend on one another. These teachings say that by seeing this flux, we can see that there is never anything happening within it that is our own self. Everything is non-self. When we realize this, we have dispelled ignorance. Thus, the 12-fold chain is broken. When there is no ignorance, there is no consciousness, no karmic formation, and so forth. Thus, we see the unconditioned, the deathless. We see that there is no I, no self that can suffer. In these teachings, understanding the dependent is breaking the 12-fold chain and seeing that everything is non-self. So I bring this in because I think that we're kind of in this loop sometimes. And even though we talk about breaking the chain, we're not really getting rid of the chain of causation, but we're just becoming more aware of how it impacts us, and that in and of itself, it may not have a reality, which I think helps relieve some of that suffering that we feel. So my last, very brief, not taking everything so seriously in the game, life game of Chutes and Ladders. And I'm going to end with a slogan from Norm Fisher's book, Training in Compassion, which is a great book. I think Jennifer, we were talking about that the other day. So this slogan I use, it's slogan number 5: do good, avoid evil, appreciate your lunacy, and pray for help. So with that, I will end my talk and open it up to any questions or comments. Steve.
Well, the karma thing is, it seems to me that there's one way out of it, and there's a bunch of ways to engage with it. I'm thinking about the Ukrainian thing, and so obviously we have to engage in diplomacy and figure out energy and religion and all these things that we can talk about and engage with productively, and but the way out of that karmic loop, and it just seems to get bigger and bigger. The more we engage with it, we have all this intelligence and all these so-called people of goodwill engaging with this, and we just seem to create more problems. And so then the way out of it is to understand, which is this odd thing that isn't knowledge, but understanding is actually leaving knowledge and entering into the most abject state of any player in any field. And then once you enter into that most abject state, actually then you're the ultimate winner. But you can't not continue to engage in all these very karmic and seemingly devolving processes.
Yeah, so for the audience, it's talking about karma, the karmic tendencies that we see in the world in our current situation, like the Ukrainian conflict, but that's only one of many conflicts out there. And then do we have to sink to the bottom in order to find our way out again or see what it's about? And when I think about situations like that, I can get really, really upset because there's so many harmful things being done to people. And it's like, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to someone, though, who's thinking that this is the right thing to do. And it's like, when you have this enormous conflict causing a lot of suffering and harm, how do you understand each perspective? And it's like, sometimes like in the conflict in Northern Ireland, there was a third way out of it, to try to let that conflict burn out, without creating more karma, more damage, more hatred. And it's almost like it'd be nice to give the world shock therapy to forget all these things we hold on to too tightly. So I have no answer for that, but I do acknowledge that it's a huge problem and condition, a human condition. And for me, it's the river of the world that's never ending. Because back in those days, things were falling apart and horrible. We survived. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? Don't know. Some things are better, some things are worse. So I don't know if that answers anything, but thank you for the question. Carrie.
Well, thank you for your talk. It is beautiful. It just reminded me of all the tools that I have from coming here, listening to talks, doing my practice, and it reminded me that, I can't control, this continued, like how I can try to control, manipulate my environment. My youngest son, who lives in Phoenix, woke up one morning just the other day. He called me and he said, something horrible has happened. And I said, what? And I'm worried about him, and he said, I walked to get the bus, and as I stepped out on the sidewalk, I saw a dead German Shepherd dog, and it had been shot, and it was bleeding all over. And I'm like, that's horrible. I mean, that's just horrible. And it's like, yeah, it's just really affected me, and I'm very angry. And I wanted, I called animal control, and when I got back home, it was gone. And it's like, I just want to, put a sign like, you're going to, go to hell, or, something to this person. And I said, yeah, and, what about putting a sign to send the dog on, to honor the life of the dog. And so he sent me a picture then that he had posted on TikTok or whatever, and he had lit incense by the dog, and he had played the song Puff the Magic Dragon, and he had written a poem and created a beautiful sign that he hung up on the gate, and said, to this dog, rest in peace. And so, in that horrible action, right, that somebody committed, there was this opportunity for this person to take an action of kindness. Yeah. And, so I could get stuck on the, like, why did that person do such a horrible thing? But I saw my son kind of transform in front of my eyes from anger to compassion.
Yeah,
that's stuck on.
I hope you could hear that online, because it's really using our practice, yeah, they could hear it, to turn things around, to not be in that righteous anger phase, but to turn it around and find something beautiful to do. Yeah, I like that. Katie, and then I'm gonna check online after Katie to see if you on Zoom have any questions. Yes, Katie.
Your talk reminded me of the Zen story. I'm not going to remember all the details, but it's something like a farmer acquires a horse and everyone says, that's great. And he says, maybe. And then his son is riding the horse and falls off and breaks his leg. And everyone says, oh, that's bad. And he says, maybe. And then the son, because he has a broken leg, doesn't get conscripted into the army. And everyone says, oh, that's good. So it's a story about how what you immediately think is good or bad isn't necessarily. And I've always appreciated that story to sort of, not snap judgment whether something's good or bad.
Yeah, and just, it's gonna be the next phase, the next step. Who knows? The ambiguity